What happened to the places where Britain truly gathered? Where laughter echoed during Saturday matinees or the mighty Wurlitzer sent chills down your spine? The 10 iconic UK cinema chains that vanished forever weren't just businesses, they were part of our lives, shaping weekends, friendships, and entire communities. In the 1950s, an astounding 1.4 billion cinema visits made these chains household names, yet one by one, ABC, Gaumont, Jauchemont, Granada, and the rest, they faded away, leaving our high streets and hearts a little emptier. How did something that felt so permanent simply disappear? And why does their loss still leave such a mark? The answer starts where the magic began, with the memories we all share. ABC Miners wasn't just a club. For millions of British children, it was the highlight of the week. Saturday morning meant lining up outside the local ABC, coins clutched tight, the air buzzing with excitement, and the sweet smell of toffee and disinfectant. Inside, those famous red seats seemed to stretch on forever. The real magic began when the lights dimmed and the organ's first notes rang out. Up on the screen, the words appeared, "We are the boys and girls well known as miners of the ABC." Ushers in smart uniforms led the chorus, waving their arms and keeping order while hundreds of voices joined in. It didn't matter if you were shy or bold, everyone belonged for those few minutes. Each child wore a badge pinned with pride, and some even made it onto the stage for birthday cheers or to help as monitors. The club promised good films, good fun, good fellowship, and it delivered with cartoons, cereals, and prizes handed out by the ushers. The ABC Miners song, adapted from the old tune Blaze Away, was never recorded for the charts. It was made just for these moments, written in-house for ABC in the early 1950s. No sheet music in the shops, no radio airplay, just lyrics bouncing across the screen and the sound of voices echoing through the auditorium. At its peak, the ABC Miners Club filled cinemas across the country from the 1930s through the 1980s. Some years, more than 1 million children held membership cards. The ritual was the same from Aberdeen to Brighton. Badges, singing, the hush before the first cartoon. Parents knew their kids were safe, and for a few hours the outside world faded away. But as television sets flickered into more homes, the magic started to slip. Saturday morning cartoons could be watched in pajamas. By the late 1970s, the queues outside ABC were shorter, the chorus softer. In 1986, ABC was sold to EMY, and the club's future became uncertain. The final original ABC closed its doors in 2017, taking the last echoes of the Miners' song with it. For those who once sang with the crowd, the memory lingers, a time when belonging meant a badge, a song, and a seat among friends. The world has moved on, but for many, the ABC Miners will always be the place where Saturday mornings truly belong to us. Gaumont picture palaces were the cathedrals of British cinema. Their doors opened onto marble foyers, gold leaf ceilings, and sweeping staircases that made every ticket holder feel like royalty. For many, the real heart of a Gaumont wasn't just the screen. It was the mighty Wurlitzer organ. Its notes would rise up before every feature, filling the air with a sense of occasion that ordinary life couldn't match. The organist, often Stanley Tudor in Manchester, sat high above the audience, hands flying over the keys as the pipes thundered and shimmered. Patrons remember the hush that fell when the lights dimmed and the first chords rang out. It was a ritual as powerful as the films themselves. Newsreels flickered to life, bringing the world's events to British towns before television was common. The latest headlines, royal weddings and football scores played out in black and white, accompanied by the low rumble of the organ. For many families, a night at Gaumont meant more than entertainment. It was their window to the world, a shared experience that stitched communities together. The usherettes glided down the aisles in their crisp uniforms, torches in hand, guiding people to their seats. Children stared wide-eyed at the glowing screen, parents whispered behind gloved hands, and couples held hands in the dark. But the golden age faded. By the late 1950s, the crowds thinned. Television sets glowed in living rooms, and the weekly ritual of queuing outside the Gaumont became less common. Cinema admissions across Britain plummeted from 1.4 billion in 1951 to just 500 million by 1960. The magic of the organ could not compete with the convenience of home. Management tried everything, double bills, live acts, even bingo nights, but the decline felt unstoppable. The final night at Manchester's Gaumont in 1959 captured the heartbreak of an era ending. Patrons arrived early, some clutching old ticket stubs or dressed in their Sunday best. The foyer buzzed with stories, laughter, and the knowledge that this was goodbye. As the last film ended, the Wurlitzer's pipes sounded one more time. The organist played Auld Lang Syne, and the audience joined in, many openly weeping. Ushers handed out commemorative ribbons, and for a few minutes, no one wanted to leave. The next morning, staff put on new Odeon uniforms. The Gaumont name, once a beacon of glamour and community, faded into memory as the brand was absorbed in 1959. Those grand buildings still linger in memory, the echo of the organ, the velvet seats, the way the world seemed to pause when the lights went down. For the people who filled those halls, the loss went deeper than bricks and mortar. It was the end of a tradition and the beginning of a quieter, lonelier kind of movie-going. Granada cinemas didn't just show films, they transported you. Stepping inside, you'd be greeted by Moorish arches, velvet curtains, and the sense that anything could happen in the flicker of the projector. The Granada men, always in pressed uniforms, stood ready at the doors. But by the early 1980s, something had changed. The crowds were thinning and the boardroom was restless. Minutes from a 1982 meeting capture the mood. We are sitting on gross underutilization in prime locations. Land values are astronomical. Developers saw gold where families saw memories. Granada's directors, facing soaring property prices and shrinking box office returns, began converting their grandest venues into bingo halls. In Tooting and Woolwich, locals fought to keep the cinemas open. Preservationists lobbied councils, arguing that losing these buildings meant losing a piece of community history. Sometimes they managed to save the ornate interiors, but the screens still went dark. The bingo tables replaced the rows of plush seats, and the sound of numbers being called drowned out the echo of old applause. For the company, it was business sense. Bingo brought in steady profits, and the land beneath the cinemas was worth more than the films on the screen. But the decision cut deep. In towns across the country, people watched as neon signs were switched off and posters for new releases vanished from the glass. The property boom of the 1980s didn't just reshape city skylines, it swept away decades of shared stories. Granada's last cinemas were sold off or demolished by 1991, ending an era that had promised glamour and escape for generations. Council records from the time show heated debates, with some councillors insisting that heritage is not a luxury, but profit won out. The final Granada sales slipped quietly through, and by the time the dust settled, the brand was gone. What remains are fragments: a gilded ceiling hidden above a bingo hall, a faded sign glimpsed from a passing bus. For many, it's not just a lost business, but a lost world, traded for short-term gain. The memory of Granada lingers in the spaces where dreams once flickered to life. Classic cinemas brought something new to the British High Street: choice. In 1967, at Leicester Square, manager George Cooper took a bold step. He split the Grand Auditorium in two, creating Britain's first twin-screen cinema. Some regulars were furious. They missed the sweeping balconies, the sense of a single shared spectacle. Letters poured in, and a small group even staged a protest outside, banners reading, "Don't ruin our palace." But others were quietly thrilled. For the first time, you could pick between two films under one roof. No more waiting weeks for the latest blockbuster or settling for whatever was on. It felt modern, almost American. Behind the scenes, twinning wasn't just about knocking down a wall. It meant new projection rooms, extra staff, and a juggling act with showtimes. The aim was to fill more seats, more often, but the costs added up quickly. Classics tickets stayed affordable, just a few pence more than the old single-screen days. But the margins were thin. Families liked the flexibility, students grabbed late-night shows, and couples could catch a romance while the kids watched cartoons next door. Yet, as the 1970s rolled on, classics struggled to match the scale of the coming multiplex giants. Esoldo cinemas, on the other hand, were the heart of the neighborhood. Sunday afternoons meant families in their best clothes, queuing for cheap seats and a bag of boiled sweets. The prices were low enough for everyone, just enough for a ticket and a treat, even if money was tight at home. Manager George Cooper, before his classic days, knew most regulars by name. He'd slip free tickets to kids who helped tidy up or stayed behind to stack chairs. In places like Sunderland or Stockport, Isolde was more than a business. It was where birthday parties happened, where pensioners met for a warm seat and a chat, and where the week's worries faded for a couple of hours. But the world outside was changing fast. Bigger chains were borrowing millions to build new complexes, and Isolde couldn't keep up. In 1972, the company was sold to Classic. Within a few years, many of the old Isolde sites were either shuttered or turned into bingo halls. The twinned screens and the local charm couldn't compete with the scale and flash of the new multiplexes. By 1985, Classic itself was merged into Canon. What began as innovation and community spirit ended with the quiet disappearance of two names that once meant everything to local moviegoers. Canon was the chain that brought the blockbuster era crashing onto the British high street. In the 1980s, under the direction of Menahem Golan and Yoram Globus, Canon snapped up rivals at a dizzying pace. Classic, ABC, EMI, multiplexes with blue and red neon signs popped up in city centers and retail parks. For many, a night at Canon meant sticky floors, the smell of popcorn, and the thrill of seeing the latest Hollywood hit on a giant screen. You could catch a double bill of action films, then spill out into the car park buzzing with excitement. Canon promised American-style spectacle, and for a while it delivered. But behind the scenes, the business was running on borrowed time and borrowed money. Golan and Globus built their empire on debt, using each new cinema as collateral for the next loan. Security swaps kept the cash flowing, but it was a house of cards. As the 1990s approached, the numbers stopped adding up. UK admissions hit record lows, and Canon's debts soared past £120 million. The company tried to sell off sites and cut costs, but creditors were circling. National Westminster Bank owed millions, lost patience. In January 1992, receivers from Coopers and Lybrand were called in. Overnight, 39 cinemas closed their doors without warning. Staff arrived to find locked gates and notices taped to the glass. Over 1,200 jobs vanished in the first month alone. For families, it was a shock. One week you could see the latest blockbuster. The next, your local Canon was shuttered for good. The collapse sent ripples through the industry. Some former Canon sites were snapped up by new chains. Others became bingo halls or stood empty for years. For those who grew up in the era of Canon, the memory lingers. Neon signs lighting up the night, the thump of surround sound, and the sense that anything was possible when the lights went down. But in the end, Canon's gamble on endless expansion left little but empty foyers and a warning about what happens when ambition outruns reality. In Sunderland, February 1974, a crowd gathered outside the Regal, braving the cold with homemade banners and a petition over 2,000 names strong. Margaret Embleton, a local teacher, and Harry Foster, the cinema manager, stood with them. For weeks, the Save Our Cinema Committee had leafleted high streets and knocked on doors. The Regal was more than a building. It was a landmark, a place where families celebrated birthdays and first dates, where generations learned to love film. But English Heritage refused to list it. The council, unmoved by the protests, approved demolition. On closing night, the Regal screened Gone with the Wind. People lingered in the foyer, some in tears, unwilling to let go. The next morning, the bulldozers arrived. In London, July 1982, EMI's Empire Leicester Square glittered with anticipation. The premiere of Pink Floyd's The Wall drew crowds that snaked around the block. Inside, the sound system thumped and the seats shook with the force of the music. Rock fans, film buffs, and industry insiders mingled, clutching discounted album vouchers from HMV. For one night, EMI made cinema feel urgent and new again. A fusion of film and music that set box office records for July. But just 4 years later, EMI sold its cinemas to Canon, and the era of music-driven movie events faded. The Savoy, with its art house films and continental coffee bar, was a haven for Leicester's film lovers. In 1989, Picture House Cinemas took over, promising to keep the spirit alive. The staff stayed on, the programming broadened, but the old Savoy feel slowly slipped away. The regulars, students, artists, older couples, missed the quiet sophistication, the sense of belonging to a small but passionate community. The Savoy's neon sign still glowed, but the name now belonged to history. On the coast, Shipman and King cinemas were part of every summer holiday. Rainy afternoons meant dashing from the pier to the warm, dark auditorium. In August 1966, regulars received farewell letters. To our cherished guests, the final curtain for a summer tradition. The last film, fittingly, was Summer Holiday. After the credits rolled, staff handed out postcards as keepsakes. Families spilled out onto the promenade, knowing something precious had ended. For many, it felt like the true end of summer. No more picture treats by the sea, just memories carried home after one last show. In 1951, UK cinema admissions peaked at 1.4 billion. Evidence of how deeply these vanished chains shaped British daily life. We've seen how ABC's Miners Club, Gaumont organ performances, and Granada's luxury-defined eras, only to vanish through changing habits, television, and rising property values. Documents show the Cannon Group's collapse in 1992 marked a definitive end, with overnight closures and creditors moving in. Yet some facts remain unclear, such as the precise final night details at Manchester's Gaumont, despite archived programs and press reports. What's certain is that these chains were more than businesses. Their loss changed high streets, communities, and how generations shared stories. Today, multiplexes and streaming offer new ways to gather, but nothing fully replaces the communal rituals remembered in photos, ticket stubs, and surviving club songs. The evidence leaves no doubt. These cinemas may be gone, but their impact endures in both our culture and our memories.